With Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan detailing his midterm budget today, we are joined by our business panel of Michael Spicer. He's a Vice President for Corporates and Africa at Business Leadership South Africa, as well as Mark Lamberti, Chief Executive of Transaction Capital, and Mike Toshut, who's the partner at Mazars, joining us from Cape Town now. Mike, or rather Mark, will also be looking at the latest disposals from his company, that would be Transaction Capital. Interestingly enough, we've got a Mike, Michael and a Mark. We were making a joke about that earlier off air with some of our counterparts, but Mark, I'd like us to start off with you, especially with regard to Transaction Capital selling off its stake in Bayport. Just exactly why was that done?
Well, I have to go into the history for a moment. Bayport started in Africa by two gentlemen, Stuart Stone and Grant Kurland. In 2005, they expanded into South Africa, and in 2010, we bought 82.6% of the South African business from them. We all envisaged that in time we would have to get these two businesses together under the founders. Their business grew in Africa at a rapid rate while our business in South Africa improved dramatically, but at the same time fell under the cloud of the unsecured lending concerns in the country. So while we at the beginning may have thought that we would purchase the African business and bring the whole thing into Transaction Capital, we now had to reevaluate that and say, well, hang on, to get those two businesses together, best that we sell our piece back into the African business under the founders.
Just with regard to that, you mentioned in your statement that negative sentiment around unsecured lending has led the industry to, or rather the market, to ignore Bayport's success or performance rather. What exactly do you mean by that? Well,
Bayport under our control, and I think it's reflected in the fact that we bought it for about 527 million rand. We've just sold it for 1.33 billion. Since 2010, under our control and with the assistance of the founder, Stuart Stone, we've improved the business dramatically and the performance has been good. But I think the shadow around unsecured lending has reflected poorly on people's evaluation of the company, and indeed that's moved through to Transaction Capital.
Do you have concerns regarding unsecured lending in South Africa?
There's no question that the South African consumer is under stress. The consumer market in general is under stress, and there are clearly people out there that are overborrowed. So we are concerned about that, but that wasn't the thing that prompted the sale of the business.
And with regard to 65% of your headline earnings per share coming from unsecured lending, that's together with
that's
Bayport?
Incorrect.
Or was that mentioned in your statement earlier today?
We would have had over 65% coming from unsecured lending if we'd acquired BML, the African business, rather than the other way around.
Oh, so this is a way of decreasing or minimizing that exposure rather?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Any other future plans that we can see from Transaction Capital?
We've got two very, very exciting businesses. Our taxi business is the dominant taxi financing business in the country. We've got a lending business, a collections business, which collects about 28 billion rands of debt on behalf of the major debt lenders in the country, the major retailers, the major banks. Those two businesses are leaders in their field, and we're very excited about their future.
Perfect. Let's get into the news of the day now. And Michael, I'd like to bring you in. Today we had the midterm budget delivered by the Finance Minister in South Africa. Some news there with regard to cost cutting, but nothing major for businesses in SA.
No, I don't think there was much to be expected there, and overall I'd rate it as a solid performance, which is likely to reassure markets and reassure the rating agencies. What we saw was that spending is being controlled, revenues are more buoyant than one had expected, and the twin deficits are going to be tackled over the 3-year period, which is under review. So I think a credible budget. Much of the things that we would like to see is beyond the remit of the minister in this statement. They really have to await formal structural changes. He did refer to those, to the economy and some of the policies that would be needed to do that. So I think the right signals were sent all around.
When you say structural changes, what are you referring to?
Well, we're dealing with vexed issues such as the labour market. One of those policies is, of course, being at least inaugurated with the wage subsidy, which is being tabled in Parliament. I think there were some other signals that were sent, but generally speaking, they're not going to be contained within a medium-term budget statement.
Mike is in our Cape Town studios now. Mike, I'd like to get your insights and your views with regard to the Finance Minister's speech. Was enough said to allay fears?
Sorry, Gugu, just repeat that, please. Sorry.
No problem. I want to get your take with regard to the Finance Minister's speech today. Do you believe that enough was said to allay fears, in particular with regard to the investment community?
Yeah, look, I do agree with what Michael has said. It is a solid performance. No huge surprises that have come through. We always expect them to reinforce the previous policies, and especially they've reinforced the National Development Plan. So yeah, I think he's done a solid performance. I'm sure it will also then give some confidence to our investors, and yeah, it should go down fairly well. I'm not too sure what the markets have done recently or post that budget speech, but I'm sure the market will tell us shortly.
Mark, I'd like to come to you as a Chief Executive of Transaction Capital, a JSE-listed company. You also founded and currently sit as the Chairman of Massmart, one of the biggest retailers, not only in SA but on the continent. But do you believe that the Finance Minister is doing enough? I know corporate SA has a lot of complaints with regard to labour legislation, the amount of red tape, as well as it appears as though government is trying to squeeze as much tax out of them as possible. But what areas do you think he didn't touch on that could have pleased corporate SA?
Well, I think some of the things that he did touch on, although some of it might have been more symbolic than others, I think his emphasis on cutting expenditure of the government itself was largely symbolic but excellent. I think that the discussion around youth unemployment and the fact that he's going to be doing something about that tomorrow, that's very, very important. I think that generally, I happen to be a big fan of the Finance Minister, and I think that under the circumstances he's done an excellent job. The emphasis throughout his speech on the NDP was heartening, and I'd like to see that translated into action. And of course, as you may or may not know, we in business leadership are working with the government to try and emphasize certain obstacles to growth in order to meet the objectives of the NDP. So I think in general, from the little I heard of it and have read of it, I think the Minister's done well.
Michael, Mark mentioned there are certain obstacles. What exactly are those, and what are you doing as business leadership together with companies like Mox?
We're working in a number of structured partnerships. Firstly, to look at the issue of infrastructure and infrastructure delivery, accelerating that, making it more efficient and more effective. We're looking at the whole regulatory set of issues. Clearly, there's a lot to be done there, trying to lighten the burden of red tape and to look at legislation that is more investor friendly.
Will we see less talk though and more implementation?
Well, I think that's very much what we are hoping to achieve through these partnerships. There's a very important, significant partnership underway on education, which is spearheaded by Sizwe and Kasana. I think Mark's also involved in that. And we're beginning to see some traction and delivery there, particularizing. This is not just generalized talk. It is dealing right at the grassroots in a number of districts, in a number of schools, getting to grips with whether there is the right infrastructure, whether there is a headmaster or headmistress, whether the teachers are appropriately qualified, have textbooks being delivered. So it is quite micro, it's not just sort of macro talk. So those are some of the areas that are being worked on. And I should mention just one other thing which I caught my eye, sort of intriguing. In terms of disciplining expenditure, Minister Gordhan said that no new expenditure or lending would be contemplated to state-owned enterprises. They might be assisted to borrow, but there would be no further sort of bailout funds. If there had to be, there would need to be a clear restructuring plan, and then sources of finance that were other would have to be tapped. And he said, such as the sale of non-core state assets.
Top of mind comes SAA.
And so I think I'm not going to particularize, but this no dreadful P word was used, but I think that would be a very important departure point.
One other point I would add is that when it comes to regulatory burden on business, I think frequently individual ministers with the best of intentions make laws. I've often said that when the government doesn't like what's happening, they make laws. When unions don't like what's happening, they strike, and when business doesn't like what's happening, they don't invest. But when the government does make laws, sometimes individual ministries with good intention, they don't realize what the cumulative effect of their laws are on one single business. And so individual businesses might have laws coming down from 5 or 6 ministries, and that burden is crippling, particularly in the early stages of trying to get an entrepreneurially founded small business off the ground. And if we can overcome that, I think we'll be in a much better place.